What is more valuable, Claude tokens or USD?
My agents are building my agents.
July was the first month that I spent all of my Cursor tokens and then paid for more. So in this video I wanted to give you, without any hype, a quick overview of the things that worked well, things that went horribly wrong, and also some strange things that I noticed. I finally learned HTMX with a bit of help from Claude. So for those of you who are not familiar, HTMX is a minimal framework for building apps that introduces a few additional HTML attributes which extend the basic functionality of your static markup. Things like partially replacing parts of your page when a button is clicked and so on. And part of the reason I spent all of my Cursor tokens is that I prototyped a service that helps me communicate more easily with my team and potential sponsors on this channel. But more importantly, I made it to learn HTMX. So how did Cursor help me with this? As I already mentioned, with HTMX you can achieve interactivity by partially replacing parts of your page with the response from the server. For example, here in this chat room, when I send a message or upload a file, the backend will send a WebSocket message containing HTML fragments to replace on the page, like the notes section, attachments, messages, and so on. And while I was prototyping this entire flow, I kept asking Cursor to implement various endpoints that return believable, realistic responses in a given format. To me, this was very helpful because I could test out all the different HTMX attributes quickly with a quote-unquote real backend. And Claude, coupled with automatic restarts from the server thanks to the Dino watch command, was so efficient in this learning process. Also, Claude was able to spit out a rather generic looking but usable chunk of CSS that helped me move forward. But I will come back to this part of the code a bit later because there is something else strange going on. But in short, I will say that Claude did allow me to learn, and I wanted to point this out because this use case of AI is not really often talked about. Secondly, I did manage to implement my project faster than I would just by typing all of this by hand. But when it comes to code quality, let's just say we will discuss it a bit later in this video. Now, before we continue, a quick word from our sponsor, which is, in contrast to what I'm building, actually used by millions of people. Gamma is a tool for creating beautiful and captivating presentations, lessons, websites, portfolios, and anything in between. Now, in contrast to coding using AI, where sometimes you get code that looks a bit strange, Gamma delivers its value in a much more straightforward way. What you see is what you get. And if you start from scratch, a beautiful presentation is very difficult to put into words. But Gamma has been trained to create delightful designs with no explanation. That's the real benefit. Just type your idea and Gamma knows what you want. It's fine-tuned for this very purpose, which saves you typing and delivers better results overall. You can create all kinds of charts, diagrams, import your branding, repurpose your work for socials, integrate with other apps like Calendly to book meetings, and so much more. It's really comprehensive, and it's being used by over 50 million people, so check out the link in the description. Oh boy, where do I start? I think I will start with saying that after what I experienced in my actual codebase using Claude and Cursor for an entire month, these types of videos which raise the hype about using autonomous agents running in parallel also raise the hairs on the back of my neck in sheer terror. Once I put together this project using HTMX with more success than I anticipated, I found that it was lacking one more feature, which is the ability to send email notifications to participants about unread messages. Sounds reasonable. And what also felt reasonable at the time was to build my own email service. I am working on a whole separate video about this project because it turned out much more interesting than what I anticipated, but here I will tell you about one horror story. So in both of these projects, I laid out pretty much the same architecture plan to Claude because I wanted to use the same tech stack and everything, which for completeness sake consists of a single Dino instance paired with MongoDB and hosted on Railway. And as you might imagine, every project on this good earth needs a way to keep track of timestamps. My personal preference, which comes from being burned on other projects in the past, is to simply use a Unix timestamp. And even though I'm not a very religious guy myself, I believe that Unix timestamps are what God intended to be used. And so I instructed Claude to do the same in both projects. What could possibly go wrong? Well, it turns out Claude uses seconds in my sponsor portal project, diligently converting using millisecond values everywhere, whereas in my email service, it uses milliseconds. And I must say, I had a lot of fun trying to chase down some of the bugs as a result of that. And at this point, I even gave up. I already deployed both projects to production because I needed them, and now it's going to be a fun little task for future Marco to do a database migration and put an end to this abomination. Now, I understand that Unix timestamps were originally defined by the number of non-leap seconds that have elapsed since midnight on January 1st, 1970, but JavaScript and Java has been using milliseconds ever since, well, I don't want to say, but since the beginning of time. So to even imagine having 10 or maybe 20 Claude agents running in YOLO mode on my codebase is kind of scary. Now, I want to come back to that ugly piece of CSS in my sponsor portal project. And even more, let's look at the entire file. It's almost 600 lines of templated strings, helper functions, views, and everything in between. And what's strange is that it works. I mean, not functionally. I think the fact that it works functionally is nothing short of a miracle, but the fact that it works for Claude. This piece of CSS with styles for each class given on a single line, or generally speaking, the lack of any code organization structure in this file is very confusing to my human brain, but it seems like Claude prefers it, because I guess it's optimized for ingestion. When I ask Claude to make changes here, it usually is able to do it in one shot, even if it involves adding maybe an entirely new feature. But when I tried the same style of prompt with my macOS utility app, which is a far more mature project with what you might say looks like a better code organization, Claude often fails. Is this the world we are moving towards? Entire code bases in one file, because in 10 years from now, humans have largely forgotten how to write code, and for machines, splitting up a code base in multiple files is unnecessary overhead. I find that to be a very strange future. One similar and absolutely glorious thing I've noticed is happening across the industry is the wholesale transition to plain text. I was recently reading some documentation for Effect, this aristocratic TypeScript library, and I noticed links for LLMs friendly documentation. And among all the wild things that have come out of this AI hype bubble, this is probably my favorite one.